Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. I never thought I'd be standing in front of a decaying building, its windows shattered and its walls crumbling with age. Yet here I was. How did I end up in this place? The answer was simple curiosity. It had led me here to the abandoned research facility that had once been a beacon of scientific progress. Now it was nothing more than a forgotten relic. But something told me that the darkness within it held more than dust and old equipment. I could feel it in the air, thick and stagnant, as though the building had been waiting for someone to rediscover its secrets. I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the rusted door handle. The wind howled through the trees surrounding the facility, its mournful sound like a warning. But I ignored it. I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old papers, chemicals long since evaporated, and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. The floor creaked under my weight, and I shuddered, unsure if it was my imagination or if the building itself was alive, reacting to my presence. I glanced back at my team. Jack, Emily, and Ben, all as eager as I was to uncover the mysteries of this place. Jack, ever the optimist, grinned at me. "It's just a building, Sam. Let's find out what's really been going on here." I nodded but didn't share his confidence. There was something deeply unsettling about this place. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty room, but the heavy silence of something forgotten, something ignored. The kind of silence that screamed, "Stay away." We ventured deeper into the facility. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, faded and yellowed with age. Old equipment lay scattered in the corners, some of it covered in dust, others broken beyond recognition. Yet there were signs that someone had been here recently. The fresh marks on the floor, the disturbed dust in the corners. "Did anyone else hear that?" Emily's voice cut through the silence, her tone tense. She stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide, searching the dark hallway. I turned, but all I saw was the same old rusted pipes, the same overturned desks, the same broken windows. Nothing moved. "No," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. But the filing remained. The sensation that we weren't alone. The constant flickering of the overhead lights didn't help. Every time they buzzed and hummed, I felt a prickling at the back of my neck as though someone or something was watching us. We continued on, our footsteps echoing in the hallway. As we passed an old door, Jack pushed it open with a groan. The room beyond was cluttered with old papers, files, and equipment, most of it too broken to make any sense of. "Look at this," Ben muttered as he crouched beside a pile of discarded papers. He sifted through them, eyes widening as he uncovered something. "These are research notes. They go back decades." I walked over to him, trying to ignore the strange noise that echoed through the walls. It was faint, but I could hear it clearly now, like a low, almost imperceptible hum. I focused on the papers in Ben's hands. They were full of equations, chemical formulas, and sketches of human anatomy, all with annotations that didn't make sense. But something caught my eye, a symbol, repeated over and over again in the margins of the pages. A spiral. What is this? I asked, pointing at the symbol. Ben frowned. I don't know. It looks like some kind of pattern. I reached over to take one of the papers from his hands when a sudden, sharp noise made us all freeze, a loud bang echoing through the walls. It sounded like something falling or someone knocking on metal. I turned, my heart pounding. There was no one there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the building, something hidden, something that had been waiting for us to find it. We need to leave, Emily whispered, her face pale. I don't like this, but it was too late. The hum had grown louder, and I felt a chill wash over me. I looked back at the others, their faces tense, uncertain. We had come for answers, but now I wasn't sure I wanted them. The air felt heavier, charged with a presence I couldn't explain. Jack hesitated, glancing toward the door. We'll be fine, he said, but his voice trembled. I could see it now, the uncertainty, the doubt in his eyes. The same fear that had begun to crawl up my own spine. A low growl echoed from deeper within the building, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate in my chest. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a pipe. This was something else. We have to get out of here, I said, my voice tight with panic. Now, but as I turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping us inside. The hum intensified, vibrating through the walls. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence pushing against us. We were no longer alone in this place. Something had awakened, something ancient, and it wasn't going to let us leave. And then from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. The room plunged into an oppressive darkness as the door slammed shut behind us. My heart thudded against my chest, panic surging through me like a tidal wave. The hum that had been a faint whisper now grew louder, like the deep resonating pulse of something alive. Something hungry. The floor vibrated beneath our feet, sending ripples of unease through my every nerve. What the hell was that? Jack's voice was shaky, his usual bravado crumbling. Ben reached for his flashlight, flicking it on. The beam of light cut through the dark, revealing nothing but dust-covered furniture and cracked walls. But the shadows, they seemed to move. A stretch and twist. My stomach churned. Everyone stay close, I ordered, though I wasn't sure if it was meant for them or myself. My hands trembled as I ran them through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. We need to find another way out. This isn't right. The silence felt deafening now, pressing down on us. I swallowed hard, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. It was as if the walls were closing in. It was no longer just a place of abandoned science. It was something worse, something abandoned by time and memory. And it seemed determined to keep us here. Emily's eyes darted nervously around the room. That thing. Did you see it? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. That shadow. It was huge. I stared at her, confusion clouding my mind. Shadow. What shadow? Emily calmed down, I said, but my voice faltered. I couldn't deny that something felt wrong here. My skin crawled, the hairs on my arms standing on end. There's nothing in here with us. Let's just suddenly, a loud crash from the hallway interrupted me, cutting through the air like a knife. I froze, every muscle tensing, my breath catching in my throat. The sound came again, closer this time, a thudding, scraping noise like something dragging across the floor. "Did you hear that?" Jack whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "I did," Ben muttered, already moving toward the door, flashlight trembling in his hand. "We need to check it out. Are you crazy?" Emily hissed, grabbing his arm. "That's exactly what we don't need to do. We need to get out." Now, but the sound came again. Louder, closer, a long, drawn-out groan. The ground seemed to shake beneath our feet, as if the very foundations of the building were groaning under the weight of whatever was coming. Before I could stop him, Ben pushed open the door with a sharp creak, and the beam of his flashlight spilled into the hallway. There at the far end, the shadows seemed to ripple and twist, as if they were alive. The air was heavier now, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and faintly rotten. "Stay back," I ordered, stepping in front of Ben. But it was already too late. The shadows parted. It was difficult to comprehend what I was seeing, my mind struggling to make sense of the grotesque form emerging from the darkness. It was not human, but it was not entirely something else either. Tall, far too tall, its limbs stretched unnaturally, reaching the ceiling with sickening ease. The skin was dark ashen, a sickly, decayed texture clinging to its bones. Its face was a blank canvas of mottled skin and hollow eyes, eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, emitting an eerie light that burned into my soul. I stepped back, my breath hitching in my throat. "What the hell is that?" Jack's voice cracked in horror. I couldn't respond. The thing's gaze, if you could call it that, pierced me. It was as though it could see inside me, into the deepest parts of my thoughts, unraveling every layer of fear I had ever experienced. Its mouth opened, and for a split second I thought I saw its jaw unhinge, a terrible sucking sound emanating from within. Then came the whisper, a low, guttural voice that seemed to fill the space, vibrating in my skull. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the meaning was clear. Leave. Ben stumbled backward, and before any of us could react, the thing lunged forward, its movements impossibly fast. I reached for anything to defend myself, anything, but there was nothing. I felt its cold, decayed hand wrap around my wrist, and a searing pain shot through my arm, like fire running through my veins. It didn't let go. The world tilted, spinning. The walls seemed to close in as I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, the rush of blood roaring through my skull. It was as if I was caught between two realities, one that existed in this world and another that was ancient, forgotten, and hungry. The creature's grip tightened and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke, I was lying on the cold, cracked floor of the abandoned laboratory. My head throbbed and my body ached as if I had been crushed under the weight of something immense. I tried to move, but the moment I did, pain shot through my arm and I winced. "Sam," Emily's voice broke through the fog of my mind. I turned my head and saw her standing a few feet away, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The memory of the creature flashed through my mind, but it seemed like a dream, a nightmare that I couldn't fully remember. We need to get out of here," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "That thing, it's still here." I tried to sit up, but dizziness overwhelmed me, and I slumped back down. "Where's Ben?" "Where's Jack?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Emily shook her head. I don't know. They were right behind me, but when I turned around, they were gone. It's like they vanished. I swallowed, trying to clear the knot in my throat. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. Something had happened, something I couldn't understand. We weren't just trapped in a decaying building. This place, it wasn't just abandoned. It was a tomb, a vessel for something ancient, something far worse than anything we had imagined. And I was beginning to realize that we were never meant to leave. My body felt like lead as I pushed myself up from the cold floor, every inch of me aching from the lingering grip of that creature. I tried to steady my breath, to calm my racing heart, but the room, no, the building itself, seemed to be pressing in on me, suffocating me with its silence. The walls closed tighter, the shadows seemed to grow longer and more oppressive, as though the building were alive, watching us. Emily's eyes never left the dark hallway that led into the heart of the abandoned laboratory. I could see the fear in her expression, the raw panic. She was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps, but her gaze was fixed on the unknown. "What happened to Ben and Jack?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to find them," but Emily didn't answer right away. Her lips trembled as she stared at the darkness beyond, and I knew she was trying to make sense of what had happened. We had all seen it, the thing that had attacked me, the creature from the depths of this forsaken place, but she hadn't seen it as closely as I had. Well, she hadn't felt its touch. I don't know, Sam. It's like they just disappeared. Her voice was a whisper, and I saw the reflection of her growing terror in her wide eyes. "We shouldn't be here. This place it's not just abandoned, Sam. There's something else here. Something watching us." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the gnawing fear clawing at my insides. I had no time for fear. I had to find my friends. They were out there somewhere. They couldn't be lost. They couldn't. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stand, though my legs felt like jelly beneath me. My thoughts raced. I scanned the room quickly, my eyes darting over the decaying equipment, the cracked glass, the rusting metal. The stench of mildew mixed with something foul, a metallic tang that cut through the musty air. Someone had been here recently, though the place had been abandoned for decades. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. We weren't alone. "What about the door?" I asked, my voice barely audible as the weight of the room pressed down on me. Emily shook her head. "It's locked. There's no way out." I tried, a sick realization settled in my stomach. We were trapped, not just by the physical barriers of this decrepit building, but by something more sinister. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The only sound was the faint hum of the electricity that still somehow powered parts of the facility. I forced my legs to move, ignoring the throbbing in my arm where the creature had touched me. I had to focus. There was no time for pain. We had to find Ben and Jack. We had to get out of here. We walked down the hallway, the beam of Emily's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The further we moved, the heavier the silence became. Each step echoed too loudly, reverberating off the walls in a way that felt wrong, out of place. The air grew colder, like a breath from the depths of the earth itself, creeping along our skin. I could see Emily's breath, her exhale visible in the cold air that seemed to have suddenly materialized around us. "I don't like this," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. I think something following us." I didn't need to say anything. I could feel it too, the way the shadows clung to us, the way the air seemed to grow denser with each step. The further we ventured, the more I could feel the oppressive weight of the building, pressing in on us from all sides. We rounded a corner, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the darkness, like a movement in the corner of my eye. Then it came into focus. A figure, a tall silhouette, almost human, standing at the end of the hallway. It was dressed in tattered clothes, its form hunched as though it had been there for years, decades even. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking, though I tried to make it sound authoritative. There was no answer, just the faint scraping sound of feet dragging against the floor. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, waiting. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold, empty eyes that pierced through the darkness. I stepped forward, my hand trembling as I reached for my flashlight. "Ben, Jack," but as soon as I took a step, the figure moved. It didn't walk, it glided, gliding toward us with an unnatural speed, its movements jerky and unsettling. My breath caught in my throat and I froze, paralyzed by the sight before me. "Emily," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Run!" I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to. I turned and bolted down the hallway, my feet pounding against the floor, my heart thudding so loudly in my chest that I couldn't hear anything else. Behind me, I heard Emily's footsteps follow, though I could tell she was just as terrified as I was. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew that it wasn't friendly. And if it caught us, I risked a glance behind me. The figure was there, closer now, too close. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its eyes still gleaming in the dark. It opened its mouth wide, too wide, its jaw unhinging in a grotesque display. I felt bile rise in my throat. I couldn't stop. We couldn't stop. We turned another corner and the figure was gone. For a moment the hallway was empty, save for the sounds of our ragged breathing. But the air was still thick with something malevolent, something watching, waiting. I didn't stop running. We reached a door, one that looked like it might lead to a storage area. It was our only option. I threw myself against it, heart racing as I grabbed the handle. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against the door, the wood splintering slightly under the force of my push. Again. Finally it gave way. We tumbled into the room, breathing hard, covered in sweat. The door slammed shut behind us, and I leaned against it, my body shaking. I tried to catch my breath, but my mind was racing, my heart still pounding. "What the hell is going on here?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my voice hoarse. "But we need to get out of here." Now I looked around the room. There was something here. Papers scattered across the floor, old equipment covered in dust, and a large, rusted metal door at the far end. But something caught my eye. On the wall, scratched into the concrete, was a symbol, familiar yet horrifying. It was the same symbol I had seen on the notes from the lab, the one Ben had insisted was just a coincidence. But it was, and now I realized it was all part of something far darker. "Sam, look," Emily said, her voice barely audible. I turned, following her gaze. On the floor beneath the desk was something else, a body. Not a dead body, not exactly. It was as though the flesh had been sucked from the bones, leaving a hollow, desiccated corpse behind. The eyes of the body were wide open, staring into nothingness. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The truth was beginning to unravel. The experiments, the strange disappearances, the twisted creature we had seen, it was all connected. And the worst part was, we were part of it now. The room was cold, colder than it had any right to be. The thick, oppressive silence wrapped around us, choking off any hope of hearing anything other than the frantic pounding of our hearts. I tried to focus, tried to pull myself together, but everything in me screamed to run. To leave this place, to forget everything and never look back. But we couldn't. Not yet. Not until we understood what was happening here. I could hear Emily's shallow breaths beside me, her presence a small comfort, but it wasn't enough to ease the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my gut. I had seen that body, the one on the floor, and it wasn't just a body. It was something more, something terrible, something that shouldn't exist. The eyes were frozen in a scream, but they weren't just vacant, they were plighting. "Sam, what do we do now?" Emily's voice trembled, breaking the silence. I didn't answer at first. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know. Every instinct told me to turn around, to leave this forsaken place, but my mind couldn't accept that. I had to know what happened to Ben and Jack. I had to find out what had been done here, what had been unleashed in this cursed place. I took a step forward, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that something was watching us. Something far worse than the creature that had attacked me earlier. My gaze fell back on the body, and then, like a magnet pulling my attention, I focused on the symbol scratched into the concrete wall. The deeper I stared at it, the more it seemed to pull at my mind, like it was calling to me. A part of me wanted to turn away, but another part, no, a darker part, wanted to understand it. To know what it meant. The symbol was intricate, a series of overlapping geometric shapes, like something pulled from an ancient, forgotten language. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just an experiment. This was ritual. I glanced back at Emily, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you recognize it?" This symbol, she shook her head slowly, her face pale. "No, but I've seen something like it in the notes. On the research Ben found. It's part of something we shouldn't have meddled with." I swallowed hard. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but there was no time for that. Whatever had happened here, whatever they had uncovered, was worse than we had imagined. It was no longer just about Ben and Jack. We were caught in something far larger, far more dangerous than I could have ever anticipated. What if the experiments weren't just about science? Emily whispered, more to herself than to me. I didn't have an answer. I was too busy staring at the walls, the cold, crumbling walls that seemed to be pressing in on us. Something about this place, this laboratory, felt like a tomb. But it wasn't just any tomb. It was a tomb for forgotten souls. Forgotten scientists, forgotten experiments. I stepped toward the door at the back of the room, feeling Emily's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. There was something in there behind that door. I could feel it. The door creaked when I touched the handle, the sound loud in the suffocating silence. I yanked it open, and the room beyond was bathed in an eerie, dim light, as though the shadows themselves were alive, moving in a way they shouldn't. The room was filled with more of the same old equipment, scattered papers, empty glass vials, but there was something else. The air was thick with a putrid metallic stench, the kind you get when something dies and rots, but then, just beneath it, something else. A whisper, not a voice. Not a word, but a sound, almost imperceptible, like the wind rustling through the trees or the faint hiss of static on a radio. I turned to Emily, my eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" She nodded slowly, her face drawn tight with fear. "It's coming from in there." I stepped further into the room, my breath shallow. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like voices. A low murmur, like 1,000 voices speaking all at once, but none of them were clear. None of them were human. I could feel the air shift as though it was alive, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then on the far wall I saw it. A monitor, old and battered, flickered to life, casting a sickly green glow over the room. It buzzed and crackled, but the image that appeared on the screen froze my blood. A sequence of images, disjointed, fragmented, flashed before my eyes. They were humans, or what was left of them. Their skin stretched tight, their eyes wide open in eternal terror, but they weren't alive. They were frozen, trapped, their bodies twisted in unnatural, impossible shapes. One image stood out. A man, his face obscured by shadows, his hands raised to the screen as if pleading for something. His eyes were filled with desperation. With pain. I took a step forward, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, like it might give way at any moment. The whispering grew louder again, and now I could hear words. "Help me," I froze. The voice, it was human. Awake, struggling. "Ben," I whispered, my voice cracking. But the whisper didn't stop. It moved. It shifted in a way that was almost too perfect, as if it had been waiting for me to call out. As if it had been waiting for me to reach out to it. Suddenly the room plunged into darkness. I felt the air shift, and before I could react, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor. I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was the figure from before. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, emerging from the shadows, were more figures. Human shapes, but distorted. Twisted. Faces obscured, bodies bent in unnatural angles. They were dead, but somehow still here. A cold laugh echoed through the room. A laugh that didn't belong to any of us. It was deep, throaty, and full of malice. I stumbled back, pulling Emily toward the door, but the figures moved faster. They weren't walking. They glided across the floor, their movements jerky and inhuman. Their faces remained hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, judging, waiting for something. "Run," I gasped, but the words barely left my mouth before one of the figures lunged toward us, its outstretched hand reaching for my throat. I ducked, feeling its fingers graze my skin, and I pushed Emily toward the doorway. Go, but it was too late. We were trapped. The world felt like it was collapsing around us. Every breath was ragged, every heartbeat pounding in my chest, as if trying to break free from the suffocating grip of fear that had taken hold of my body. The shadows in the room stretched, twisted, and morphed into grotesque shapes that seemed to move with a mind of their own. My eyes couldn't follow them fast enough. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and every noise, every whisper seemed to penetrate deeper into my mind, like 1,000 nails scraping along the walls of my sanity. I could hear Emily's breath beside me, shallow and quick, but she was silent otherwise. She wasn't screaming, wasn't pleading. She was frozen just like I was. Frozen in terror. The figures, those things, were closing in. They didn't walk. They floated, their limbs unnaturally elongated and twisted. Some had faces, others were just voids where features should have been, like they were hollowed out from the inside. There was no sound but the whispering, growing louder, pressing against my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Then one of the twisted figures, lunged forward, its long fingers scraping against the floor like claws. It stopped just short of reaching me, its face, or what passed for a face, twisting in an impossible grin. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits, but somehow I could feel it watching me, knowing me. As if it could see into my soul. I couldn't breathe. The whispering grew louder. The walls seemed to close in. And then I heard it. Help me, the voice. A voice I recognized. Ben's voice. I whipped my head around, searching frantically for him, but there was no one there. The only thing left was the oppressive silence that followed. The darkness seemed to press against my skin, making my flesh crawl, suffocating the air. I tried to scream, but the words were trapped in my throat. Ben, Emily whispered, her voice shaking. I turned to her, my face pale, heart racing. She looked back at me, her expression filled with horror, yet there was something else too, fear, yes, but something more. Something deeper. She pointed toward the far wall, her fingers trembling. I followed her gaze, and there, etched into the wall in dark, crimson strokes, was another symbol. This one was even more complex, twisted and angular, a grotesque pattern that seemed to pulse in the dim light. It was everywhere, in every room, on every surface. I could feel it, we could feel it pulling at us, beckoning us to uncover its truth. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the cold concrete. The moment my fingers made contact, the room seemed to lurch, like the entire building was shifting under us. A deafening screech filled the air, followed by a sudden, overwhelming silence. A voice, Ben's voice, filled the room again, but this time it was clearer. Stronger. You shouldn't have come. It's too late. They're watching, the walls shuddered. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I wanted to turn and run, but my body was paralyzed, my feet glued to the floor by some unseen force. The figures moved again, gliding forward with terrifying speed. Emily screamed, breaking the silence, and in that instant I felt a shift, a cold pressure in the air. It was like the very fabric of reality had been torn, leaving us exposed to something far darker than we could comprehend. I turned to grab her arm, to pull her away, but the shadow-like figure was there. It reached out for her with its elongated fingers, but as it touched her skin, a sickening crack echoed through the room, and she froze, her face contorted in agony. No, I screamed, lunging forward, but the thing, it was too fast. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save myself. I looked back at her helpless as the figure dissolved into the shadows, dragging her with it. The walls were closing in again, the whispering voices overwhelming everything. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, crashing into one of the machines that lined the wall. Its sharp edges dug into my side, but I didn't feel it. What I felt was the overwhelming hunger. Something was coming, something worse than the horrors that had already taken us. I could feel it deep in my bones, the desperate urge to survive pushing me forward, even as my mind struggled to keep hold of reality. I needed to get out. A sudden crash interrupted my thoughts. The doors burst open, the sound of metal scraping against metal deafening. A figure stood in the doorway. At first, I thought it was another one of those creatures, but this one was different. It was human. No, it looked human. The man stepped into the room, his face gaunt and hollow, his eyes wide with terror. His body was covered in what looked like thick, black veins pulsing under his skin. "Don't touch it," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too late for you, it's too late for all of us." I didn't understand what he meant. My mind was spinning. I wanted to ask him what he knew, but before I could, his eyes locked onto mine, and he took a step forward, his movements jerky and unnatural. "You have to stop it," he said again, his voice strained. "Destroy the symbol." I didn't have time to think. Without another word, I lunged for the nearest object, an old metal rod discarded in the corner, and swung it at the wall. The metal struck the concrete with a sickening thud, but the symbol remained. It didn't even crack. It didn't move. It didn't even flinch. The man stepped closer, his hand reaching toward me, and in that instant I saw it, the truth. The veins under his skin weren't just veins. They were something else, something alive, something sentient. "Run," he whispered. And then in an instant he was gone. The room spun. The walls began to close in on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was the overwhelming hunger. But this time it wasn't just the monsters watching me. I was becoming one of them. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. There are times when silence is louder than any scream. It isn't just quiet, it's heavy, suffocating, a pressure on your chest that grows tighter with each passing second. That's how it started. The wind. I had heard of the northern winds, of course. How could you not, living in a small town at the edge of the world? People in these parts talk about it like a living thing, a force of nature that no man can tame. It wasn't uncommon for the wind to howl and screech through the night, rattling windows and bending trees like they were mere twigs. But this wind was different. It wasn't just loud. It was hungry. I remember walking home from the general store, the gusts pulling at my coat, forcing me to lean forward just to stay upright. The town was quiet, too quiet for a typical evening. The usual chatter from the pub had died down long before, and even the dogs had stopped barking. It was just me and the wind. At first, I didn't think anything of it. After all, storms came and went in this part of the world. But as I neared the edge of the woods, something shifted in the air. A subtle change. a strange heaviness in the atmosphere that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I quickened my pace, eager to get home. But that's when I heard it, the sound. A faint, distant whisper. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the usual rustle of branches or the hiss of the air. No, this was different. It was, words though I couldn't make them out. I turned around, expecting to see someone walking behind me, but there was no one. Just the woods, dark and sprawling, silent except for the relentless wind. I laughed nervously to myself. You're hearing things, just the wind playing tricks, but even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods ahead of me felt like they were closing in, the shadows deepening as though they were pressing in on me. The whisper came again, clearer this time, though I still couldn't understand it. But the tone, it was low, almost mournful, like someone or something was calling for help. No, it wasn't help. It was a warning. My breath hitched in my throat. Something was out there, watching, waiting. I turned quickly and started walking faster, almost running now, desperate to get out of the trees and back into the safety of town. But the wind picked up, a deafening roar, filling my ears with the sound of rushing air and something else, something deep, primal. I stumbled, almost falling, but righted myself and kept moving. I couldn't afford to look back. I knew if I did, I wouldn't be able to keep my sanity. The air around me felt colder now, biting at my skin like needles. I shivered uncontrollably, my breath coming in sharp bursts as I pushed myself forward, each step heavier than the last. The whispers, they were louder now. They came from everywhere, swirling around me like a chorus of voices. Go back. It's too late. Go back, the words were unmistakable this time. But it was the tone, the urgency, the raw fear that made me stop dead in my tracks. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. It was as if the earth itself was holding me in place. And then the wind stopped. A complete silence. For a moment I thought I had gone deaf, but then I heard it. The crunch of leaves. A slow, deliberate step in the distance. Something was moving. I strained my eyes, searching the darkening woods, but I saw nothing. The trees were still. The air was still. It was then that I heard it clearly, a low growl, something far too deep to belong to any animal I had ever heard. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, heart pounding, legs burning with every step. The wind began to howl again, the sound like a scream, sharp and anguished, pushing me forward, egging me on. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted through the forest, the sound of something following me, getting closer, growing louder. It was right behind me now. The growl, now unmistakable, was joined by a heavy, rhythmic thumping. It was following me. Whatever it was close. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The woods, the trees, the very air around me seemed to twist and warp as I ran, the world spinning, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My lungs were on fire, and I could feel the weight of fear pressing down on me. But just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, I broke through the tree line and into the clearing. The town was in sight. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I didn't stop until I was safely inside my small cabin. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. But as I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, I heard it again. The whisper. You can't escape the wind. The voice, soft and malevolent, slipped through the cracks of my mind and settled deep within my bones. The wind didn't just carry sound, I realized. It carried something else, something far older, far darker than I had ever imagined. And it was coming for all of us. The wind had not just been a storm. It had been a warning. The night was far from over, but I could already feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The storm outside had become relentless, tearing at the walls of my cabin, the wind howling like a thing possessed. It sounded different now, more purposeful, more deliberate, as if it was searching for something. Or someone. I paced the small room, my feet dragging against the wooden floor as I tried to steady my breath. The whisper still echoed in my ears, refusing to fade, its cold breath sinking into my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back from the woods, something wrong, and it wasn't just in my head. The fire in the hearth flickered and spat, casting erratic shadows across the room. The flames should have been comforting, should have made the room feel warm, safe even. But all they did was make the shadows dance, twisting and shifting as though they were alive. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The whispers, the growls, the way the wind had seemed almost. Aware it all felt too unnatural, too sinister. But the question that gnawed at me, the one I couldn't ignore, was why me? Why now? I thought back to the stories the old-timers in town used to tell, the ones about the wind, the one that carried death on its breath. They spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid the wind might hear them and come for them too. It was said to have been born centuries ago, a curse tied to the land, tied to the sins of those who had come before. And every so often the wind would return to claim its due. Had I unwittingly become part of the story? Or was I simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? I shook my head, trying to silence the rising panic. I needed to think clearly, to figure out what was happening before it was too late. But how could I think clearly when the storm outside seemed to be creeping closer, wrapping its icy fingers around my home, slowly squeezing the life out of it? I glanced out the small window beside the door. The trees were bent low, their branches swaying violently, almost as if they were reaching for the cabin, beckoning me to come out. The moon was barely visible, obscured by thick clouds that churned in the sky like a storm that would never end. Then through the shrieking wind I heard something new, something that made my blood run cold. A soft tapping like fingernails scraping against wood. It was coming from outside. My heart skipped a beat. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It was too precise, too measured to be the wind. Someone or something was out there. I took a slow step back from the window, my pulse pounding in my ears. The tapping grew faster, more frantic, as though whatever was outside knew I was watching. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I waited for what felt like an eternity, the silence stretching unbearably thin. I felt a cold sweat bead on my brow, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Then came the voice again, faint but unmistakable. You can't hide from the wind. I jerked back from the window, my pulse racing. The voice sounded closer now, closer than before. But there was no one there, no sign of movement outside. Just the storm howling and screeching like a wounded animal. I stumbled to the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the lock. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't wait for whatever was out there to find me. But before I could turn the handle, I heard something else. A deep, low rumble that seemed to come from the very earth beneath my feet. The floor beneath me trembled, and for a moment I thought the cabin itself was about to collapse. I pulled away from the door, my heart racing, my mind struggling to catch up with the terrifying reality unfolding around me. The wind was no longer just outside, it had found its way inside. The flames in the hearth flickered wildly, their light dimming, as though the very air around them was being sucked away. The temperature dropped, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just cold, it was unnatural. The air tasted sharp, metallic, like the first breath of winter before the snow falls. I backed away from the fire, my feet stumbling as I searched the room for anything to defend myself with. But what could I do against something like this? How could I fight the wind? The whispering voice returned, louder this time, filling the room with its sickly presence. You can't run from your sins. A chill crept up my spine as the words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Sins? What sins? I racked my brain, my mind frantically grasping at any possible explanation. There was nothing in my past that could have brought this upon me. I was just a man living in a small, quiet town. I had no enemies, no dark secrets to hide. At least that's what I had thought. But something was wrong, something I couldn't see was trying to tear me apart, piece by piece. The wind wasn't just a force of nature, it was alive and it was angry. The walls of the cabin creaked and groaned as if they, too, were being pulled apart by the unseen force outside. The floor shifted beneath my feet, the ground trembling violently as the wind outside screamed louder, rising to a deafening crescendo. I could feel it now, a pressure building in the air around me, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush me at any moment. I ran to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle again, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. But as I turned the handle and threw open the door, I froze. The storm outside wasn't just a storm anymore. It was something else. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. Tall, cloaked in black, with eyes that burned like coals in the dark. I couldn't make out any more details, just the presence of something wrong, something beyond human understanding. And then, with a sickening crack, the wind began to howl again. But this time, it wasn't a mere roar. It was a scream that pierced my very soul. And that was when I realized. The wind didn't just carry death. It was death. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat as the figure in the clearing stared back at me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The wind roared around me, pushing against my body, pulling at my clothes as if urging me to move, to run. But my legs felt like stone and my mind was racing, unable to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure remained motionless, standing at the edge of the trees. Its presence was wrong, unnatural. I could feel it, this wasn't just a person. This was something else, something ancient and malevolent, something that had no business being in the world of the living. I wanted to scream, to yell, to run, but no sound came from my mouth. My entire body was paralyzed by a primal fear, an instinctual terror that I couldn't shake. The wind howled louder, the noise rising to a deafening crescendo. It seemed to be urging me to approach, but I resisted, stepping back instinctively. Then the figure moved. Slowly, almost too slowly, it began to cross the clearing, its steps deliberate and heavy. The darkness around it seemed to bend, the trees leaning away from its path as if they, too, feared the thing that walked among them. Every part of me screamed to turn and run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, trapped in this horrifying moment where every second stretched on forever. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears, drowning out the sound of the wind. And then, just as the figure was about to step into the light of the doorway, it stopped. For a moment, everything was still. The wind had fallen silent, as if the storm itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. I could see it now more clearly, its form etched against the backdrop of the howling storm. The cloak it wore billowed around it like a dark cloud, its edges ragged and torn, fluttering as though it were alive. The hood was drawn low, obscuring its face, but I could feel its gaze burning through the darkness, piercing me, seeing right through to my very soul. Then, without a word, the figure raised a hand, a long, skeletal hand that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its fingers were thin, sharp, like claws, and as it moved them through the air, the wind stirred, responding to its call. The sound was unbearable. A sudden rush of wind, louder than any gust I'd ever heard, slammed against the walls of the cabin. It rattled the windows, sending splinters of glass flying through the air. I shielded my face instinctively, but I couldn't move, couldn't escape. The storm had swallowed me whole, and there was no way out. The figure stepped forward again, and this time it was no longer just a figure. It was a presence, something ancient, something that had been waiting for me. "You cannot escape what you've summoned," it whispered, its voice a rasping hiss that slithered into my ears. The words twisted in my mind, but I could hardly understand them. Summoned. What did it mean? How could I have summoned this thing? The wind picked up again, whipping the cloak around the figure, making it seem as though it were alive, a part of the storm itself. The dark energy surrounding it seemed to draw closer, creeping into the cabin, curling around me like a suffocating blanket. The figure's eyes glowed brighter now, burning like two embers in the storm. I could feel the heat from them, an unnatural, searing heat that made my skin crawl. My heart raced, every instinct telling me to run, to hide, to do anything to get away from this thing. But my body betrayed me. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to fight back. The figure raised its hand higher, and the wind responded. It howled, a deafening scream that felt as though it were tearing the world apart. The walls of the cabin groaned, and I thought for a moment the structure might collapse under the force of the storm. And then in the midst of the chaos, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The shadows in the corner of the room, the ones I had thought were just tricks of the light, began to shift. They moved as if they had a life of their own, coiling and stretching toward me, reaching out with cold, clawed fingers. "You cannot hide from the past," the figure hissed again, its voice becoming louder, more insistent. The shadows closed in around me, thick and oppressive, like a living, breathing thing. I stumbled back, my chest heaving with panic, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows were everywhere now, swirling around me, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even scream. And then, with a sudden, bone-chilling clarity, I understood. This wasn't just a storm. This wasn't just some strange figure in the woods. This was a curse, something tied to the land, tied to the very air that surrounded me. This wind, this force, was not simply nature. It was a manifestation of something darker. It was a force of vengeance, a judgment from the past, a reckoning that had come for me. And I had no way of stopping it. I felt my body shaking, my legs threatening to give way beneath me as the wind howled louder, the shadows closing in. The figure was standing in the doorway now, its form growing larger, more imposing, filling the entire frame of the door. I could see its face now, pale, twisted, with empty sockets where its eyes should have been. A cold, hollow smile curled at the corners of its mouth, and its voice echoed in my mind, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my chest. "The wind never forgets," it whispered. And then, as the shadows reached out to claim me, I understood the true meaning of those words. The wind didn't forget. It never forgave. It was supposed to be a simple hike, just a quick escape from the noise of the world. I had heard rumors about the old woods, the forgotten trails where strange things happened, but I never thought much of it. Most people in town dismissed them as stories for children, nothing more. But when I stood at the edge of the forest, the cool breeze brushing my face and the trees swaying gently in the fading light, something stirred in me. A feeling, something I couldn't place. The forest was thick, the kind of place where the shadows stretched far longer than they should, where even the sun struggled to push through the branches. I knew it well, or so I thought. It had always been a place to find solitude, a refuge to clear my mind. But that day it felt different. I should have turned back then. There were signs, small things. A slight change in the air, a scent that didn't belong. It was like the earth itself had taken a breath. I was alone, but something made me feel watched. I adjusted my backpack, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. It wasn't even dark yet, but the forest had already begun to change. The way the wind blew through the trees felt heavier, as though something was hiding just beyond the reach of my eyes. At first, it was just the quiet. Not the comforting, still quiet of the woods. No, this was different. It was waiting. I could hear my own breath, each step on the path echoing in the eerie silence. Then came the sound. A whisper. It was so faint at first I wasn't sure if I'd heard it at all. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was just the trees shifting. But then I heard it again. And this time it was clearer. A voice, low, soft, almost a sigh. Help me, I stopped in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. My throat went dry, and I cursed myself for being so jumpy. It could have been anything. An animal. The wind playing tricks. But the voice was so human. So desperate. I glanced around. The trees stood like dark sentinels, watching, waiting. The path ahead was the same as always, but there was something different about it now. The shadows seemed deeper. The air heavier. I should have turned back, but I didn't. The path seemed to pull me forward, and the whisper, though distant, called to me. The words faded into the breeze, but the feeling lingered, thick in the air. My mind raced with thoughts of the stories, the ones the old-timers in town whispered about in hushed tones. They said this forest had once been a place of worship, a site for rituals long forgotten. They said there were things here, things that didn't belong to this world. And there were those who had disappeared, vanished without a trace, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. I wasn't sure what I believed, but the strange feeling gnawed at me. I continued forward, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Then, as if to reinforce that nagging sense of dread, I heard it again. The whisper. Help me this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was something more, like a presence, pressing in on me from all sides. The ground beneath my feet felt unsteady, as if the earth itself was shifting beneath my weight. I swallowed hard, trying to push the panic back, but it clawed at the edges of my mind. And then the wind shifted. The trees creaked as though they were whispering to one another. The darkness deepened in a way that didn't feel natural. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, my breath visible in the cold air. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement just beyond the trees, a shadow darting between the trunks. I blinked, thinking it was my mind playing tricks on me, but then it happened again, faster this time. A figure tall and thin, its shape unnatural, slipping through the shadows. I froze. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't just the figure that unsettled me, it was the way the air itself felt wrong. It felt like I was being watched by something that knew I was here, knew I was alone. For a moment I stood there paralyzed, caught between curiosity and the gnawing fear that this was a place I shouldn't be. Then the whisper came again, louder, clearer this time. Help me, my mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like stone. I couldn't move. The shadow was closer now. It was almost hovering at the edge of my vision, a tall, distorted shape that seemed to bend the air around it. I took a step back, my breath quickening. The sound of leaves crunching beneath my boots was deafening in the silence that followed. I couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just the forest. This wasn't just the woods I knew. This was something else. Something older. Something waiting. And it was getting closer. I took another step back, my body moving without thinking, driven by instinct more than reason. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought to shake off the growing panic. The whisper was still there, echoing through the trees, but it had changed. Now it wasn't just a voice, it was a pull, something that seemed to reach out with invisible hands, wrapping around my chest, tightening with each breath. Help me, the words felt like they were inside my head now, as though the forest itself was speaking directly to my thoughts. The air was heavy with something thick, almost like smoke, but I could still see clearly, too clearly, in fact. The shadows were darker than they should have been, and the light, though fading, cast strange shapes along the forest floor. I glanced around again, desperate to find something familiar, some sign that this was just an illusion. But everything looked wrong. The trees, those ancient, gnarled oaks, towered above me like skeletal giants. Their twisted branches curled inward, blocking out the sky, like they were trying to trap me within their embrace. The undergrowth was dense, but instead of the usual rustle of leaves or the chirping of crickets, there was an eerie silence that swallowed every sound. Not even the wind moved the leaves now. The scent was stronger too, a damp, metallic odor that reminded me of iron and decay. It turned my stomach. I swallowed hard, pushing the nausea back, and forced myself to take another step. But the moment my foot hit the ground, a low creak sounded behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The figure. It was closer now. I could see it more clearly. Its shape seemed to warp, flickering like a shadow out of place. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that stretched too long, too thin. I couldn't make out its face or even the details of its body, but I could feel it watching me, its presence pressing against my skin like a weight I couldn't escape. Its outline was hazy, but there was something about it, something deeply wrong, that made my blood run cold. I took a shaky step back. I had to get out of there. I had to move. But the path I'd come down, the familiar trail that had always led back to the town, was gone. The forest had closed in around me, the trees forming a wall of dark shapes that didn't belong. It was as if the woods themselves had shifted, rearranging into a maze, trapping me in their depths. "Help me," the whisper came again, louder this time, and I could feel it vibrating in my chest, as if the words were not just spoken, but pressed into my very bones. The air grew thicker, colder. My breath came faster now, ragged, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet. I tried to turn to find another way out, but the more I moved, the more the forest twisted, stretching the path in impossible directions. I was losing my bearings. Nothing was where it should be. The shadow moved again, closer now, almost touching me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt them, two cold, unseen points boring into me, like it was studying me, sizing me up. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every instinct screamed for me to run. But I couldn't. My legs were frozen, as though the very ground beneath me had become cement. I glanced down at the forest floor, looking for something, anything, that would help. A branch, a rock, a weapon, but everything was wrong. The ground beneath me, once solid earth, felt soft, like I was stepping on something spongy, almost alive. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then something broke through the silence, an unmistakable sound. The snap of twigs, small and sharp, but it was enough. The shadow was moving again, the sound of its footsteps, if you could even call them that, barely audible over the thudding of my own heart. But there was something else now. The trees, those ancient, twisted oaks, were no longer still. They were alive. I could see them swaying, not as they would in the wind, but with a slow, deliberate motion, like they were reaching for me. Their branches bent, stretching toward me, the tips of their limbs curling like fingers. I could hear them creaking, groaning, as though they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My breath hitched. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, some terrible hallucination. "Help me," the voice again. But this time it was different. It was no longer a whisper. It was a cry, a scream. I looked up just in time to see the shadow move, rush toward me. It was no longer just a shape. It was alive. It was a creature, its form shifting like a mist, but with clear, grotesque details. Its limbs were unnaturally long, too long, and its skin, if you could call it skin, seemed to be made of dark shadows that flickered and writhed. Its face was a blur, a shifting void that distorted the light around it. And the eyes. I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them. Two glowing points of red, cold and burning, like coals in a dying fire, staring through me into me, as if it could see everything I had ever feared. It moved faster now, its shape blurring and reappearing in flashes, getting closer, always closer. I screamed, the sound ripping through my chest. It was as though the very air was suffocating me, pressing in on me from all sides. My legs finally worked and I turned, stumbling back down the path, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to escape. I had to run. But the path was gone. It wasn't there anymore. The trees were closing in, blocking me from any escape. The shadows stretched, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the trees. It was everywhere, the feeling of being hunted, of being watched. I turned again, my back pressed against a tree, my chest heaving with fear. The shadow was there, closer now than ever before. It was right in front of me. Help me, the voice came again, but now I knew. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a warning. A call to pull me closer. The thing that had once been a whisper, a shadow, was no longer just that. It was an invitation. And I couldn't escape. I was trapped. The thing that stood before me, a dark, shifting mass of shadows, seemed to grow with every second that passed. It was like it was feeding off my fear, its presence expanding as I shrank before it. My legs wobbled, but I couldn't move. I tried to speak, to shout, to make sense of what was happening, but no words came out. Only shallow breaths and the pounding of my heart in my ears. The figure's shape flickered again. A grotesque distortion of limbs and shifting forms, twisting like smoke caught in a breeze. But it wasn't just the form of the thing that unsettled me, it was the air around it. There was something alive in the shadows, something ancient, pulling at the fabric of reality itself. The forest, the very ground beneath my feet, seemed to breathe with it. And those eyes, those burning, coal-like eyes. I couldn't look away. They were so deep, so endless, that I felt like I was sinking into them. Time seemed to stretch as I stood there, locked in place, the forest around me falling into a thick, suffocating silence. It was as if the world had stopped turning, and only the thing before me existed. Help me, the whisper had changed again. It wasn't a plea anymore, not a cry for aid. It was something else. A command, a demand. My body jerked as if pulled by some unseen force. I tried to take a step back, but my feet were glued to the ground, and the air had grown so thick with fear that breathing felt like an impossible task. The figure tilted its head slowly, its body undulating as though it was made of liquid darkness, and for a moment I thought it was smiling at me. Or was it laughing? The sound, distant and muffled, crawled into my mind like a snake slithering through the cracks of my sanity. I shut my eyes, but it didn't help. The image of those burning eyes was burned into my mind. I could still feel them pressing against me, dragging me deeper into the nightmare. My thoughts were slipping. Fear had taken hold of everything. The trees began to creak louder now. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't like any wind I had ever felt before. It was sharp, biting, like fingers brushing against my skin, tearing at my senses. I could hear the sound of something scraping across bark, dragging, as if the forest itself was alive, waking, stirring. It was as if the very ground beneath me was shifting, groaning. And then the whispers came again, more numerous this time, more insistent. Help me, the voice was no longer soft. It was all around me, every tree, every leaf, every breath I took. It was closing in. And with the whispers, the ground beneath me shifted again, the soil moving like it was breathing. Roots crept along the dirt, slow and steady, curling toward me like fingers. I could feel the ground tightening around my ankles, pulling me in. I gasped and tried to pull away, but it was as if the earth itself had claimed me. The roots tightened, their cold, sinewy fingers wrapping around my legs, pulling me deeper. I could hear them, feel them scraping at my skin, pressing in on me like the grip of something ancient. The sound of the soil moving beneath me was deafening, like the forest was coming to life. I screamed, trying to break free, but my cries were swallowed by the darkness, by the presence that was growing stronger by the second. The figure in front of me was closer now. Its form was no longer flickering, it was solid. It stood there taller than before, its presence so overwhelming that I could no longer even think. Help me, the voice repeated, but now it was joined by others. Low, guttural tones, like an entire chorus of lost souls echoing through the trees. They were inside my mind now, filling every inch of space, consuming every thought. I could hear my breath coming faster, shallow and panicked, but there was no escape. I could feel the pressure building around me, like the entire forest was squeezing the life from me, inch by inch. The shadow's shape bent unnaturally, distorting with each breath I took, as though it were feeding off my fear, morphing into something even more monstrous. Its eyes, those burning coals, moved to lock onto mine once more, and I felt something in my chest twist. A force, sharp and cold, pressed down on me. I couldn't breathe. The forest had become a cage, and the thing before me was its warden. I needed to run, but I couldn't. I could hear the roots shifting, feel them tightening around me. The soil beneath my feet pulsed, its rhythm matching my own heartbeat, slow and steady, but each beat growing more desperate. The trees around me seemed to line in, their branches stretching downward as if they were reaching for me, pulling me into the earth. My heart pounded faster, my legs trembling as I fought to escape the grip of the forest. And then, just as I thought I would be consumed, the whisper changed. It was louder now, more desperate, the voice breaking through the chaos of the shadows. It's too late, the words hit me like a physical blow. The ground shook beneath my feet, and the shadows pressed in around me. I felt it then, the cold, seeping into my bones, deep and unyielding. The forest was closing in. The shadows were no longer just whispers, they were alive and they were hungry. I twisted, I jerked, I screamed again, but no sound came out. My breath hitched and the terror, the overwhelming weight of it, pressed against my chest, suffocating me. It wasn't just the forest anymore. It was them. And as the last of my strength drained away, I realized that the forest was not the place I feared. It was what lived within it. And it was coming for me. I felt the ground pull harder, dragging me down, deeper into the earth. The figure, now a mass of writhing black tendrils, stretched toward me, and I reached out one last time, desperately, hopelessly, for something to hold on to. But there was nothing. Just the darkness. The earth had swallowed me whole. At first it felt like a dream, a sensation of weightlessness, of floating in a deep, cold void. But it was no dream. The pull was real. The darkness consuming me. The shadows wrapped around me, pressing in from all sides. It felt like I was drowning, not in water, but in the suffocating blackness of the forest. I gasped for air, but it was thick, thicker than it should have been. My lungs burned trying to drag in breath, but each inhale only filled me with more dread. The ground, that shifting, pulsing earth beneath me, seemed to close tighter, like hands clutching at my ribs, holding me in place. Every part of me screamed to escape, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, trapped in a terrible, inescapable grip. And all around me, the whispers continued. Help me, the voice was now a chorus, low, guttural, overlapping with others, as if dozens of them were speaking in unison. At first they had been distant, faint, like a memory half remembered. But now they were here. Close, do close. I could feel them pressing in on my mind. The voices crawled beneath my skin, like invisible hands brushing across my thoughts, dragging my consciousness into places I didn't want to go. They were angry, desperate, drugged. Their cries twisted into something almost unrecognizable, a horrifying blend of pain, terror, and longing. I struggled again, my arms flailing, but the roots and the soil held me tightly. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, only the cold, damp earth pressing against my body. My fingers dug into the soil, as if trying to claw my way out, but every movement only sank me deeper into the suffocating blackness. The shadows, those living, writhing shadows, were all around me. They crept along the edges of my vision, too quick to see clearly, just the flicker of something long, thin, and distorted. They moved in ways that shouldn't have been possible, bending, warping, shifting, as if they were alive in a way that defied any logic. I could hear them, too. Their breath ragged and heavy, as if they were waiting, watching, stalking me. I tried to scream again, but my voice was trapped inside me, swallowed by the thick air. It was as if the forest itself had stolen my words, leaving me helpless. The cries of the lost souls around me grew louder, more frantic, and then something else emerged from the dark, something far more sinister. The figure, the thing that had watched me, followed me, was here now. I could feel it, its presence pressing against me, filling the space with a palpable weight of evil. I couldn't see it, not clearly at least, but I could sense it. Every hair on my body stood on end as I felt its twisted form coil around me. It was close now, closer than it had ever been. The air had grown colder still, and I could see my breath mist in front of me, though I couldn't feel the cold against my skin. Then, from the depths of the blackness, it spoke. You cannot escape. Its voice was like a low growl, a rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way I understood. It was ancient, something that had existed long before the trees, long before the land had even taken shape. And it knew me. It knew everything about me. I didn't need to see it. I could feel its eyes on me, those glowing coals burning through the darkness. They were everywhere, not just in front of me, but all around me, in the corners of the void I had found myself in. The thing was not just watching, it was feeding off me, feeding off my fear, drawing closer with every passing second. The ground beneath me trembled, and I realized it was moving again, shifting, groaning. The roots were crawling higher, tighter around my body, coiling around my chest, my neck. The suffocating pressure was unbearable. My heart pounded in my ears. The whispers grew louder, so many voices, all speaking at once, all demanding something from me. I couldn't understand their words, but I didn't need to. Their intent was clear. They wanted me. They were pulling me down, deeper into the earth, to join them. Help me, the voice was not mine. It was the voice of something else. Someone else. It was the voice of the forest, of the ancient spirits that had once walked here, and it was now calling for me to join them in the dark. But it wasn't a request. It was a demand. I thought I saw a flash of movement in the darkness. Something shifting, flickering just out of reach. But I couldn't move. The shadow was closing in, its form now towering above me, a mass of writhing limbs, a body composed of darkness and forgotten nightmares. And then, just as my breath became ragged, as I felt the darkness around me tightening its grip, I heard something else. Something that didn't belong. A snap, a crack like the sound of something breaking. The roots around me loosened. I sucked in a desperate breath, my chest heaving. Was it a trick? Or was something really happening? I dared to look. The figure in front of me, the shadow, it was shifting, as if something was pulling it apart. I could feel the earth trembling beneath me, the ground splitting, the roots tearing themselves from my skin. The voices, those tortured lost souls, were fading, their cries disappearing into the distance. The darkness seemed to recede, pulling away from me. I gasped, my head spinning. The shadow before me was vanishing, flickering like a candle flame in the wind, as if it had never been there at all. But something else remained. A figure, faint and blurry, standing in the distance, just beyond my reach. And in that moment, with the last of my strength, I pushed forward, pushed through the suffocating grasp of the forest. My limbs were stiff, my body aching, but I was moving, dragging myself through the darkness. The whispers had stopped. The shadow had vanished. And yet I knew. I wasn't alone. Not yet. The forest had let me go. But it was still here. I couldn't move. The darkness that had consumed me was still pressing against me, even though the shadow had receded. I was no longer caught in the earth, no longer trapped by the roots, but something far worse had settled in its place. The silence. It was suffocating. The whispers had stopped, but in the void left behind, there was an oppressive stillness that weighed down on me like a heavy, invisible hand. I could feel it, the presence of something. Watching, waiting. My body ached from the strain, my limbs trembling, my breath shallow and ragged. Every inch of my skin was crawling, as though the air itself was alive with malevolent energy. I strained my eyes, but the darkness was complete. Even with my senses on high alert, the forest around me was empty. I couldn't see a thing. Yet I knew the forest was still there. I could feel it just out of reach, an almost tangible thing. The trees, the ground, the air, it was all watching. Waiting for something. I took a step forward, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my feet, oddly loud in the silence. My shoes sank slightly into the soft earth, and I froze, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. But the thought of turning back, of returning to the place where I had been swallowed alive, was enough to push me forward, one trembling footstep at a time. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but I was too disoriented, too exhausted to think clearly. What had happened? What was that thing, that force that had taken hold of me? Was it real, or had I slipped into some twisted nightmare? There was no way to tell anymore. The line between the natural world and whatever dark force lived in this forest had blurred to the point of no return. As I moved deeper into the woods, my senses remained heightened. The air felt charged, as though something was waiting to crack open the stillness. The trees, now more like looming specters, seemed to press in around me. Their gnarled branches twisted above, casting long, eerie shadows that flickered and danced in my peripheral vision. But when I turned my head to look, they were always just still, too still. The path ahead was unclear, barely discernible beneath the thick underbrush. I tried to focus, but the disorientation was overwhelming. Where had the path gone? I had to keep moving, but I couldn't see what lay ahead. The wind whispered through the trees again. But this wasn't the soft, calming breeze from earlier. This was sharp, like a warning, like it was trying to tell me something. The smell of wet earth and decay filled my nose, thick and heavy. I gagged, instinctively covering my mouth and nose, but it was no use. The air was thick with it, as if the forest itself was rotting from within. And then I heard it. A sound. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle of movement behind me. My breath caught in my throat. Was I being followed? Had the thing, the shadow, returned? I whipped around, but there was nothing. The trees stood silent. The night air felt still, untouched. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, the pulse of fear too loud, too sharp to ignore. It wasn't the forest making the sound, it was something else. Something unseen. Another movement closer this time. A crack of a twig just out of sight, followed by a soft scrape. Someone was nearby. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my legs shaking beneath me, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I let myself look around without fear of seeing that horrible shadow. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The trees had changed. They were still towering, still looming above me, but their trunks were covered with a fine, silvery sheen that glistened in the dim light. It was as if they were watching me too. The bark was shifting, crawling, warping, twisting like something alive. I blinked and looked again, but the trees were as they had been before. Unchanged. Normal. I stumbled back a step, my breath ragged, unsure whether I had imagined it. But deep down I knew I hadn't. The forest was alive, and it was aware of me. The sound came again, closer now. So close that it felt like it was right behind me. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to see what was there, but I could feel it. A presence, a weight on the air, a thing that should not be. I stepped forward faster, moving blindly, desperation building within me. But the noise followed. It was subtle, so subtle that it could have been the wind or my own footsteps echoing back at me. But I knew something was wrong. My heart thudded harder against my chest. I could feel my pulse, my breathing out of sync with my body. My mind raced in panic. A shadow flickered on the edge of my vision. I froze. There, just behind a tree, a silhouette. tall, lean. It was too still to be a person, too unnatural. And yet it was a figure shaped like a man, but not. Not human. It had no face, just a black, empty void where eyes should be. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and its body twisted in ways that didn't make sense. It was like the shadow of something wrong in a way I couldn't comprehend. A thing that shouldn't exist in the world, but somehow here it was. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat, suffocated by the fear choking me. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, but it didn't need to. It was there, watching me, existing in the space between reality and nightmare. And the air around it grew colder, the weight of its presence pressing in on me from all sides. I had to move, had to get away, but my legs wouldn't obey. I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed with terror. The shadows of the forest seemed to close in, the trees whispering in voices too distant to understand, but too close to ignore. The silence was no longer calming, it was oppressive. And in the distance, I could hear something else. The sound of twigs snapping, leaves rustling. It wasn't just the figure anymore. There were others, more of them, slowly, silently creeping through the trees. I wasn't just being watched. I was being surrounded, and they were coming for me. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.